Hello, good day. Welcome to the International Conference on Consciousness-Based Leadership and Management. This is day 3 and session 14, last day. We're delighted to have the closing keynote conversation on quantum and technological approaches to oneness and flourishing. We've had a lot of sessions, we had a lot of developments, and this session has very big luminaries presenting here and discussing here to come up with some takeaways for oneness and flourishing moving into the future. We will discuss what we have learned before, and then where do we go from here. So please join in, and let's do one thing. We have been doing some contemplation before we begin our discussion. So we'll do about 5 minutes of contemplation. So while again participants also join. So please just sit back. Close your eyes and just relax, and it'll be about 5 minutes. I'll let you know when the 5 minutes are over. Thank you. Okay, so we are having a wonderful discussion. Maybe I should share the chart all over again. So these are 4 of my most favorite people on the planet. Dr. Subhash Kak. They're all 4 consciousness scholars, first of all, right? And from their own other perspective, that they're a different day job, and then like consciousness is like their absolute passion. And they're all helping push the consciousness sort of envelope to make it unbounded. Dr. Subhash Kak is actually a computer scientist and Vedic scholar. Dr. Laszlo is, I would say, sustainability expert or major scholar, leading scholar, but also has a sort of new interest, quantum and contemplation and consciousness. Anirban Bandyopadhyay is a material scientist, quantum physicist, quantum tunnel expert, but also can talk about Vedas in ways that are amazing. And Dr. Kathryn Pavlovich, she's actually a professor of strategy and entrepreneurship, but has very deep interest in quantum empathy and vibrations and stuff like that. And I'm just an interloper helping sort of be all of you together and try to come to some convergence in terms of what can we do, how can we transcend our respective ways of thinking and being and doing our disciplines, etc., to come to principles of universal flourishing. So without further ado, let me just invite Professor Kak to share with us what he's been working on. I'll let him explain. He knows what one idea he wants to explain. Thank you. Please go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Anil. Delighted to be a part of this panel, and I have whatever I have caught of this amazing conference has been wonderful. So let me see how I can bring my perspective to bear on this great objective to have a consciousness-based approach to leadership and management. Now, my story actually goes back to 1898, when one of the predecessors to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was visiting New York, and this is Swami Vivekananda, and he met up with Nikola Tesla. This was a party which was given by the leading French actress of her times, who was also on a tour of United States, and she wanted these 2 people to come together. And we have a record of what transpired, both in the jottings in Tesla's own diary and a letter that Vivekananda wrote soon afterwards to his disciples, in which he said that, look, what Tesla wants is transmission of energy. And here we have Vedic physics that Vivekananda knew. And he said, in Vedic physics, you can transform matter into energy. So I have told Nikola to work on this, and that will be good both for Vedic physics as well as for physics in general. Now we know that the transformation E equal to mc squared was not discovered by Nikola Tesla, but by Albert Einstein. But there is at least one set of opinion that Tesla was the most famous Serbian scientist of his time, and Mileva, Einstein's first wife, who was a Serbian as well, was in touch with him, and maybe Tesla gave them the idea. We don't know. I personally don't believe it, but that's an interesting story. So with this in background, for many years, I've been working on quantum computing and all that stuff. And a few years ago, the thought came to me, hey, let's explore this whole Vedic physics thing further. And this Vedic physics is encapsulated, or the beginnings of it are seen in sutras called Vaisheshika sutras, which had not been examined by physicists all these years. So I translated this 3 or 4 years ago and published a book. It's called Matter and Mind, the Vaisheshika Sutras of Kaṇāda. And while I was doing this, certain ideas came to me that maybe we need to go beyond the straitjacket of thought, which has guided, straitjacket can't guide you, maybe blinkers, if you will, which has guided modern science. And the blinkers are, first of all, goes back to Aristotelian physics, that space is like a container. And this is where everything comes in. And what we find, and of course, that's what classical physics was. And you look at Newton's conception of space and time. And then Einstein modified it, that you have matter, it's a container, but it's a container which bends. But when you go to Vaisheshika Sutra, which is Vedic physics, what we are told is that space itself is a consequence of mind or interaction with reality, just as Einstein's theory of relativity showed us that the flow of time depends upon this situation of the observers. So with this, this thought sort of set me free. And I had, in the meanwhile, early last year, proven a theorem, which has been published in a few journals, that the most efficient representation is not in 3 dimensions or in two logical categories, but rather in E categories, which is 2.718. So the thought came to me that perhaps it's a convention that we use space to be three-dimensional. What if it's not three-dimensional? What if it is 2.718 dimensional? And we go back and look at all the physics that there is. It's just a convention that it's three-dimensional. And there was a big thing a few months ago about what's called Hubble tension, that the Hubble rate of expansion of the universe based on 2 different measurements turns out to be different. I was able to show that these 2 can be reconciled. If you say that the black body radiation that we have, that's 3-dimensional, and what we are looking at, the motions of all these stars moving away from each other, that's our gloss on it, which is 3-dimensional. The earlier was, and E-dimensional. And doing that, you are able to resolve it, this big problem, which many people had said is the big crisis of physics. So I published it in Nature Scientific Reports. And what you find is that if you were to step back and say that just as matter evolves, dimensionality has also evolved since the Big Bang, and it's gone through this evolution, and it solves some other fundamental problem. The biggest fundamental problem of physics right now is that you have to invoke 96% of dark matter and dark energy, for which there is not the slightest shred of evidence. And why do you have to invoke it? Because for the last 4 billion years, the universe has started expanding at an accelerating pace. And of course, if it were to continue, then of course the world will have a cold death. The universe will have a cold death. But if you look at this from the perspective of evolution of dimensionality itself, then what you find is that the gravitation force slowly became a peak at 9.8 billion years, and then it started weakening. And because it started weakening, stars have started flowing away from each other at a faster rate. But this will balance out, and we need not be afraid. In another 300 million years, the universe will stop, flying away from each other at an accelerating pace. So now the takeaway from the perspective of quantum theory is, first of all, all creativity requires stepping out of the box. As we know, the famous book by Jacques Hadamard, the French mathematician who queried the leading mathematicians of his time 100 years ago, and they asked them, how did you come by your discovery? And most of them said, well, out of, in a strange state, we are not doing inductive thought. We are not necessarily looking for it. Most creativity occurs spontaneously. So you step out of the box, which is an important point. The other point that I think, the other important takeaway is that the very heart of quantum mechanics, from one perspective, is complementarity. You have complementary aspects of reality, wave and matter, unity and multiplicity, right? One consciousness and many experienced minds or experiencing minds. So this is one central idea of quantum mechanics. The other central idea of quantum mechanics, that of superposition, Schrödinger in his own autobiography claimed that this idea also came to him from the Upanishads, the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma. This Atman is equal to Brahman. And he mentions that in his autobiography. He mentions this also in his book, What is Life? That this is where the idea came to him. So this is again a connection, a convergence of the Vedic thing and the thing related to minds, because minds are about multiplicity. The mainstream view of reality and how we live our lives and all the politics and management and leadership is about multiplicity, that we are all apart from each other, while a consciousness-based approach to leadership and management is to look at the complementary view. We cannot deny that we are apart in our minds and bodies, but it's all held together by this interpenetrating presence and transcendent, not just interpenetrating, the transcendent presence of the one mind. So I think there are lots of possibilities where these ideas can be sort of extended more into one's own personal experience related to what one should do and how one can communicate it to the larger public, because after all, that's one of the big missions of this webinar, this conference, and the Maharishi University of Management. So I think it's all coming together. And so just to tie up all these threads, the idea of e-dimensionality of the universe also perhaps has relevance to our own conception of how our mind works, because certainly our mind works in terms of the classical or machine paradigm, while where the inspiration comes from is a transcendent thing. I must also, just to conclude, tell you that 3 years ago, the scientific community in the US at the DARPA, in fact, I can name it, DARPA did a project and they invited 20, 30 odd people from various disciplines, ranging from theoretical physics to computer science to neuroscience. And we had several meetings in different cities to debate the question, will computers become conscious in the future? And in one of these sessions in Cambridge, UK, we had a poll, and there were 50% of the people thought machines will become conscious, and they were being driven by the idea that there's nothing but multiplicity. and there is nothingness underlying multiplicity. And therefore, at such time, when we are able to emulate the various brain processes in the machine, then the machine will become conscious. But the other half, who thought that machines will never become conscious, were inspired by both the Vedas, Vedanta, and quantum mechanics. They said, well, the standard orthodox Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics also tells you that physical reality and observers and the minds of the observers are two aspects of the same thing. And therefore you cannot, like two sides of the same coin, you cannot explain the obverse side by what you're seeing here. So you have to look them together. So with this, and my takeaway is complementarity, because this is the idea of complementarity. Hopefully we can sort of discuss this further. Thank you once again, Anil.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I mean, everything is fantastic, but I thought I understood your theory when I said speak about it. But now it just hit me. You know, like it's like today we are 2.7 dimension universe, like a billion years from now we're 2.85. So even the parameters, the dimensionality can evolve. You know, we think of the evolution in terms of certain ways, but even the dimension evolving is kind of a very interesting idea, like meta level evolution. Thank you very much. So let's be, in the interest of having the ideas first presented, let's go to Dr. Christopher Laszlo, and he will be speaking about quantum worldviews.
Great.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anil, and thank you, Drs. Subhash, Anirban, and Pavlovich. It's a real pleasure to be with you here this evening. So in my brief comments, I want to explore quantum perspectives in MSR research. You've probably seen MSR as a co-sponsor of this conference. It stands for Management, Spirituality, and Religion. It's a community of some 520 or so scholars around the world in the Academy of Management who are studying management problems from this perspective. Now, MSR has a unique opportunity to lead the Academy in producing scholarly research based on consciousness and quantum science and perennial spiritual insights to effectively address many of the big global problems we face, whether it's artificial intelligence, as Dr. Subhash raised, or pandemics or climate change or social justice. Now, I want to touch on something which has underlined this conference very much, which is the role of science. You know, science, as we know from Thomas Kuhn and others, plays a huge but often hidden role in shaping our assumptions that we hold about the nature of the world, what it means to be human, and how sort of the universe works. 40 years ago, the social psychologist Kenneth Gergen wrote, "Virtually unexamined is the potential of science to shape the meaning systems of society, and thus its common activities. Assumptions in the natural sciences therefore shape our worldviews, which in turn has profound consequences for how we live and learn." And I think Dr. Subhash in some ways has already raised that with principles of complementarity compared to, you know, how we see things in the classical paradigm of science. Now here, what I want to do is consider how quantum science is converging on perennial spiritual insights, many of them thousands of years old, into oneness and connectedness. That's sort of the fundamental nature of reality. And how that convergence of quantum science and ancient spirituality is giving new impetus to research that matters. And by the way, just a small plug here, a lot of that excellent research that matters is published in the Journal of Management Research and Religion that Dr. Kathryn Pavlovich is the editor-in-chief of, and has helped bring that to one of the foremost management journals out there. So if you would allow me to, at the high level, I want to now share just a very few slides and begin with 4 assumptions. So, you know, it's very difficult to capture the quantum paradigm versus the classical paradigm in just a very small summary, and I may be leaving a few things out, but if you would allow me to,
Please go ahead.
am I allowed to share, Anil? Ah, yes, okay. I hope everyone can see this again. So welcome to everyone who has joined us tonight. As I said, my comments are on the quantum perspectives in MSR research. So here you see here a four set of assumptions from classical science, and each is compared to its homologue in quantum science. In the classical science paradigm, the universe is reducible to particles and the forces that govern their interaction. This is relatively well known. Only the particles have become more detailed, and there are more of them, but essentially this remains true today. In the quantum, corresponding quantum assumption is very different. It's that the universe is an interconnected whole composed of vibrational fields of energy, something that has been mentioned at many times, many points throughout this conference. Secondly, objects and living beings have independent identities separated in space and time in the classical science paradigm. Whereas in quantum science, objects as well as living beings are non-locally entangled, i.e. connected in space and time. This idea of entanglement, and this is something that has been proven over and over with experiments such as the double slit experiment and the Bell theorem experiment. Third, physical processes are materialistic and deterministic in the classical world, whereas physical and mental processes interdependently and acausally co-arise. This is, I think, the point that Dr. Subhash was speaking to us about, that the observer plays a role in essentially collapsing potentiality into actuality in the quantum world. And now, okay, and the last one is that consciousness in the classical world is produced by the brain, particularly a positivist materialist approach, what sometimes is called the physicalist interpretation of consciousness. Whereas in approaches that I would say don't come directly from quantum science, but have an affinity with quantum science, suggests that consciousness is primary and non-local. In other words, it's not a product of the brain or a quality of the material world. So I also want to say the purpose here is for me is not to suggest that one of these is better than the other. Both are needed, and also to some extent it depends on context and purpose. Let me just suggest to all of you that if you are ever standing under an apple tree in a windstorm, you may be better served by Newtonian physics for obvious reasons in deciding how to behave. However, we contend, and that's really my proposition here, is that to address the complex, interconnected challenges that we face, that humanity faces, such as climate change and social justice, but also other technological challenges related to genomics or CRISPR technology or whatever it might be, the quantum paradigm is both more accurate and more normatively desirable. What is interesting is the convergence of the quantum paradigm of oneness and connectedness on these traditional spiritual insights from the world's major religions and spiritual traditions. So a unifying source of all that is can be found in the Advaita Vedanta, the African philosophy of Ubuntu, the Native American notion that all animals and plants are our relatives, the Chinese Tao, the Buddhist Sunyata. In the middle there you see the Jewish Kabbalah, this notion of Ein Sof, which is the ineffable background, non-material background from which the material world comes. And of course, many others, the Zoroastrian Asha, the mystical realm of Sufism, and Christian notions of God as well. So my point here is that the convergence of quantum science and spiritual wisdom on oneness and connectedness and complementarity is giving rise not only to a new ontology, but also to a new epistemology. meaning how we know what we know. So while spiritual wisdom has been largely rejected as a basis for management practices, quantum science is giving fresh relevance to some of these perennial spiritual insights. Now, when I say other ways of knowing, let me speak a little bit about this. This actually is a quote from two of the leading scientists in the Maharishi International University community, Doctors Schmidt-Wilk and Dr. Heaton. So they wrote, another modality of knowing besides objectification and abstraction becomes necessary to plumb the inner subjective depths of our spirituality. What are these other ways of knowing? Well, traditionally in spiritual traditions, it's sensing, intuition, presencing, wonderment, dreaming, which can give in management research, an experience of wholeness and connectedness. They help us to make sense of what happens during meditation, which elevates our consciousness. Quantum science helps us to interpret what is happening when we connect to a sense of oneness and connectedness, because that's the nature of the underlying reality that quantum science describes. So such an epistemology is essential to MSR scholarship. It has long been viewed with skepticism by other management scholars in other divisions of the academy. But I think with the impetus of quantum science and the impetus of consciousness research at MIU and elsewhere, we're now seeing MSR take on new importance in the world of management scholarship. So what I think the opportunity is here is to think about the new ontology and epistemology at the point of convergence between quantum science and ancient spirituality, to rethink who we are in the world we are, to see us as spirit-infused beings in a world that's alive with meaning, to see humans as essentially caring and compassionate instead of just utility maximizing, selfish, competitive individuals. To see that we are striving not only to survive in a survival of the fittest, but to flourish, to live life to its fullest. To see that we are an integral part of nature and not only using nature as a resource. And finally, that we co-create the world through our observation of it. And it's this last point that I'm dwelling. I'm almost finished, Anil. I have about 45 seconds left in case you're managing time. But this last point is critical. We co-create the world through our observation of it. So I want to leave us with one statement and two questions. The statement is that through a quantum lens, MSR research can be seen as calling forth a reality rather than objectively studying a world out there as the classical science paradigm would have us believe. The questions that MSR researchers ask, the intentions they believe, the images of a desirable future that they are studying can actually cause that future to be actualized. And so scholars in the quantum/spiritual framework have a much greater impact and greater role than they have had in the classical approach of simply trying to describe objectively without in any way including themselves in the process of research. The two questions are, should all research be viewed as responsible for creating the reality it studies? And how can MSR scholarship contribute solutions to climate change, social inequity, and racial injustice as a result of this repositioning? If you are interested in pursuing these questions in MSR scholarship, if people are interested in pursuing those questions, I would welcome them to join the MSR community in the Academy of Management. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so we got this idea, complementarity expanded or explained in the two ways of classical versus quantum and so on and so forth. One that's explained. Thank you very much. Let's go to Anirban. Dr. Anirban Bandyopadhyay is in Japan, and he actually has shown materially the sort of quantum entanglement, how things go from this side to that side. But anyway, go ahead, please, Anirban, present your big idea. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Anil, and thanks everybody. You have done a wonderful job putting everybody together. So my name is Anirban, and it's good morning from here to all of you. And at the age of 28, I came to Japan. I didn't even finish my PhD, and I got a project to build artificial brain. So I didn't understand what is it, and I tried to build it like a stupid guys, put a lot of complex circuits together and all these things. But very soon I realized that we get our conscious experience. We become conscious every 200 milliseconds. So there is some quantization. So, 20th century, the biggest thing that we learned, humanity learned, is that everything is not continuous. It's discrete. It's isolated at the smallest, tiniest scales. And then continuous thing that appears to us is very classical and then big idea. So what I did is I found that whole brain becomes conscious at 200 milliseconds. I wanted to see inside. Okay, so I saw that in 50 milliseconds there were some exchanges. So clock inside a clock, and then if we go inside, then there are neuron. Neuron cell is responsible for our thought and consciousness. Many people have argued. So I took the neuron cell and we found that milliseconds clocks are there. So 200 milliseconds. You go inside 50 milliseconds, you go 10 milliseconds, and then 1 millisecond neurons are firing. Inside the neuron, there are some nanowires. And then my expertise is in nanotechnology. So what we do, we took out the strings. It's like a guitar. It makes some music. So we understood the music. And then the music was beautiful. And then we found that it's a microsecond clock. There is a. So from millisecond, we go to microsecond. And then I took the single protein out. Single protein is a molecule by which our whole body is made. Okay, now coronavirus is made of thousands of protein molecules together with the RNA code inside. So I measured their vibration also and listened to their music. And then their music is also beautiful. And then that is in the nanoseconds. Then I took out the small, tiny helices inside the molecule, few atoms. And then I also measured their vibrations, and it's in the picoseconds. So clock inside the clock, inside the clock, inside the clock, inside the clock. Now, how do I make a computer out of it? It's very difficult, and I had absolutely no clue, because the biggest problem was then by that time, I already in 2010, 2011, I met Roger Penrose, and then he wrote a book, Road to Reality, How to Understand This Universe. And then there he has written that everything I have discussed in this book will go away and a new mathematics will come in to explain the universe. Oh God, it was a 1,000 pages book. And then I finished it, and then I couldn't get any answer. Clock inside the clock, 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 inside a beautiful chain. But where do I go? Because current computer science says, or the science that I was trained with, they say that you have to write an equation. It should be statement, state, perfect. Absolutely, it should be defined. You can't say it's something inside and something inside. Then it becomes an undefined function. Then what happened? I saw that everything works like a clock. And then I met a few people, and then I started discussing. Then I found that confusion is a word that is very important. And then confusion means some contradictory thoughts. So I wanted to find what is the good definition of a confusion. And I searched and found Maharishi Gautama's book, Nyaya Sutra, wrote in 550 BC. And then the way he defined confusion is extremely beautiful. And then he said how to solve a problem, how to make a decision. To make a decision, don't look at the facts, because facts are your emotion biased. What you do is you try to find out where is the confusion. How do I find confusion? So regarding confusion, he wrote fantastic. The Sanskrit goes samana aneka dharma upattaha vipatteha upalabdhi anupalabdhi avya vastataha vishesha apeksha samannaya. The meaning is it should be conflicting, it should be coexisting properties, it should be realized or could not be realized, and then completely contradictory. It should be like an onion. You understand, you go inside it, you find something else. and you go inside it, something else. So I found exactly inside the protein architecture. So why not use Maharishi Gautama's way to go there? But the problem is I have clocks. Clock inside a clock, inside a clock, inside a clock, inside a clock in the whole brain architecture, giving rise confusion. So how do I go? So then I found Maharishi Ganita's work. And Ganita means, you know, in India, I don't know about a different part of India, but in Bengal, where I am from, we call algebra Bij Ganita. Bij means seed, Ganita is Ganita, sage Ganita. I never knew Ganita is actually a Maharishi who actually for the first time several thousands of years back said, time is not continuous, it's discrete, it's quantized from through t 10 to the power minus hundreds of nanoseconds to 10 to the power 22 seconds. It's a chain and there is a time. And in his honor, we Indians call arithmetic as Patiganit. So Ganit, so the sage's name, and then it continuously it goes on. So the thing is that when you have this kind of quantizations, how do you proceed? So I started finding out that there should be a pattern. And then people talked about this pattern. And then I went to classical music, Natya Shastra, Bharat Munis. And then I found that always 23 poses, 23 notes are there to build classical music. And then I brought that music and tried to compare with the protein vibration. And I understood that, look, if we want to solve a problem, and then we build a computer, we patented it. So from 2011 onwards, and then now we are trying to license it with the best companies of the world. So several of the products will be coming up soon. But the point is that you can build a computer. You can think what is happening around you as a series of facts. Then you get biased. Read the paper Eat from Bit. It's a very famous paper. It suggests that when you are looking at the world and then taking the fact, you are always biased and you are taking it. But if you go for confusion and try to build architecture of confusion, that means what did I do today? So you say that, okay, today morning I walked, but I don't understand what you are saying. It's not complete, it's incomplete. So I go inside, I found some more fact-like things, but I go inside. So Maharishi Gautama says, you go inside the confusion continuously until you reach fact. So the whole civilization that we are seeing today, that is collect many facts and bring them together, integrate it together into an architecture. But the Hindu way of doing it was totally different. I can tell you hundreds of books starting from Maharishi Kapil's to 14th century, even 14th century, Bhigana Bhikshu, when he was writing it, he was trying to put it in this way. So Indians, we debated that take a confusion, go inside, and go to the bottom, and you end with facts. And the architecture that you get is the solution of the problem. So that is what I would like to offer to you, not going into details, and then leave it open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anirban. That was very high speed. I think you covered in 6 minutes, but normally I would have spoken in 12 minutes. Thank you. So thank you very much. And I think I'm just heard you talked architecture confusion, right? And we heard, I will discuss more, but let's just go in the interest of big ideas. Let's go now to Dr. Kathryn Pavlovich. And she has come up with this whole idea that it's all a vibration. Why not? Kathryn, please go ahead. You want to share charts? No, she's going to just talk about it. All right, go ahead, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'd also like to thank you all for being part of this, because these are really difficult conversations to have. And we're actually holding space, probably for the rest of the world to catch up. But many of us have been doing work in this area for a long time. And as we know, we're not necessarily seen as legitimate scholars. So yeah, so well done for everyone for being here. Since I put in my abstract, my thinking has actually changed a little bit. So I'm going to present some of my current work, but I'm actually in a state of flux at the moment because it's just not flowing. So I'm already picking up ideas. So hopefully you can help me through this. But when I stopped and think about it's all a matter of vibration, I'm really interested in the nature of organizing. And to actually make a difference, we really do need to be shifting the conversation into some of the mainstream conversations. And that's really what I'm trying to do. So when we're looking at the nature of organizing, I really became interested in this 20 years ago when I got my PhD. And I was looking at the evolution and transformation of an icon tourism destination here in New Zealand, the Waitomo Caves. And I managed to get data for over 100 years. And one couple of the key things that came out of that was the need for that it was non-linear, that change actually happened through the small local interactions that we had. And there was a lot of heterogeneity, which meant, it was around multi-sector partnerships. And the key thing that came to me was that these partnerships created volume filling forms and capabilities within the destination, which meant all possibilities existed. It was just the nature of these relationships and how they could be constructed that really was the thing around whether the destination was holistic or not. And over time, I drew on Gilles Deleuze's work around organizing as rhizomes. And it was quite funny how that happened, because I was in a bookshop in San Francisco and this book just jumped out at me, and it was Gilles Deleuze's work. And it was like, wow, the most perfect thing to try and understand here. So if we're looking at this concept of volume filling, what jumped out at me is, oh my gosh, this is about space. This is so exciting. This is not empty space. And we talk, most of our research is around water, air, fire, and earth, but we never talk about ether and the spiritual impulse that actually pulls us all together. And the one quote that I just absolutely love about space is that it's not empty space. It's a fiery field of intense energy exchanges. And to me, that's, wow, we can call forth a reality that we want in any way based on these multi-sector partnerships. And so I'm trying to challenge this ontological space that, around our known ways of organizing, in terms of seeing organizing as processes, interdependencies, entanglements, and collaborations. And so the work that I'm trying to do now is to look at these multi-sector partnerships as ways of being able to engage with our grand challenges, but drawing forth quantum dimensions to try and understand what's happening. And so when we look at my earlier work that pulled forth these multi-sector partnerships and the importance of relationships and the way that they were structured is what was important, I'm now looking at relationality, diversity, and the sense of oneness and transcendence. And I'm drawing on this notion of entanglement and coherence. Now, originally I had relationality and using entanglement to actually explain relationality. But Subhash, after listening to you, I thought, oh no, actually maybe it's coherence. And then my second category of diversity and multi-sector partnerships and complementarity, I haven't been able to find something to connect there, but maybe it's entanglement, I'm not sure. So my thinking is changing all the time. But the key thing, as we all know in quantum physics, is that at the level of quanta, things touch, and they always take the properties of that they've been in touch with out into the field, no matter where they are. So I think we are able to use a lot of that understanding to explain how does relationality work, because so much of the language around interdependencies and relationality talks about this stuff, but it doesn't actually explain how and why they work. And so that's what I'm really trying to do in some form. But like I said, I'm actually quite lost at the moment. So yeah, so I'm working on that. And the point of this is we're looking at a vibrational field. And if we want to address these big challenges, the role of contemplative practice becomes really important here. And as we've seen throughout the conference and our own research, we know that there's so much scientific evidence that says, you know, just 10, 15 minutes a day actually changes our own neural pathways, our own structures. We know that if we meditate or whatever our contemplative practice is, that it increases the density of our hippocampus. We know that our temporoparietal junctures are actually changed, which dissolve those boundaries between self and other. We know that mirror neurons are activated, whether we're having the practice or whether we're experiencing the practice. And the quantum perspective allows us to understand how these shared experiences can actually change the nature of the environments that we're working in. And so I've come up with this concept of quantum empathy. Some people might call it the universe, the zero field. Maybe it's love or goal or God. For me, it's quantum empathy. When we're sharing the experience with someone else, it's rippling out into the universe. And it's a level of coherence where change can actually happen. And so within this quantum empathy, it's relational. It's a relational property that actually underlies the whole system. And it's a spiritual metaphysical impulse that actually self-organizes the system as well. And if I have just a moment left, Anil, can I just show one slide? I've been disabled, sorry. That's okay.
Now you can. Go ahead, please. Share.
I know some of you might have seen this before.
Yes.
But just to give an example of how this works, this photo is a photo of my granddaughter who's excessively beautiful. I know that I am pretty biased, but I think you would all agree that she's pretty gorgeous. I'm sure if we were in a room together, I could see lots of nods and happy smiley faces, and I knitted the shawl that's wrapped around her as well. Well, a couple of hours after this photo was taken, she was rushed into hospital for brain surgery. As you can imagine, that was a fairly difficult experience for us. But the good news is she's fine now, so that's great. She's got her 7th birthday coming up. But I use this as an example, and it would be particularly strong if we were in a room together, that you can actually physically feel the shift in the room. When we're talking about this beautiful little baby, we feel warm. There's quite a lot of joy and, you know, some laughter coming round. But when I say that she's gone into hospital to have brain surgery, there's a dramatic shift in the energy. The energy becomes really cold and still. And it's such a powerful experience for actually show how we can co-create with this. Sorry, just put my timer on. How we can co-create with this with the universe and use this empty space and actually use this quantum empathy to create a future that we all want in a collective sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can stop sharing, please. That's wonderful. So, what have we heard? I think we saw many things, but I think the one common element is there are two sides to it, or complementarities to it, or confusion to it. In fact, in the session on Saturday morning, Dr. Anil Gupta, professor from Ahmedabad, also Padma Shri Award winner like Dr. Kak, he talked of various ways of learning management. And he said one way is to hold the Chinese way of holding 2 tails of the dragon. I said, that sounds like architecture of confusion to me. So you can sort of intuit the facts and theory to come if you look at the 2 tails instead of going to the normal. So let me just ask, maybe Dr. Kak, you can begin. What did you hear, and what are you feeling as the ideas that you heard and where it would go in the future?
Okay, a bridge from quantum theory to practice. in quantum theory, there is a result called the quantum Zeno effect, which was found in the 1970s by my friend who passed away last year, Professor George Sudarshan of Austin, UT Austin. And there he showed, and it's been amply established in the lab, he showed that just by observation alone, you can steer the state of a quantum system. And because, the question that always is asked, but if you're talking to students, and if you tell them that consciousness and materiality are two different things, then the question is, how do they interact? So this paper established, and it's been proven in the lab, as I mentioned, and this also ties up with the points that were made by both Chris and Kathryn, the points that you can create the world through observation and through interaction and through intentionality, right? Because when you observe, if nobody's observing, then you are part of the flow, so you're not changing anything. You don't have the capacity to change. But when you observe, so when you bring in intentionality, for that, you have to have a certain vision, because sometimes people might be too happy to do nothing at all. So first of all, you have to say we want to change the world in a particular way, just as in MIU and elsewhere, people have said so. And then you have to have a certain plan, because now with the quantum Zeno effect, we do know that indeed the observer can change the world. The observer does not have to bring in physical force. And now from the other perspective to this is the Vedic tradition itself. This is a question which was debated by the Vedic sages for several centuries, maybe more than 2,000 years. And they came up with a resolution. Firstly, the question in those conversations was, how does the deity change the world? Because the world is governed by laws. In Sanskrit, rit. Everything is laws, right? From rit, you come right, R-I-T-E. Right? Because Sanskrit and European languages are related. So everything is by law. So how does Shiva or Vishnu or the goddess change the world? And the answer was something called Drishti Srishti Vada. Drishti means observation. Srishti means creation. God creates the universe through observation. God doesn't have to come in and physically, push things this way or that way, right? So Drishti Srishti Vada is precisely the point we are talking about here, that through Drishti, through intention, through a clear vision, the more clarity you have, the more ability you'll have to change the world. In fact, just this afternoon, and I tweeted it, I came across this quote by Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher who wrote Thus Spake Zarathustra. And the quote is, I'm going to paraphrase it. He says, those who think they are profound value clarity. Those who are obscuring things don't have clarity, and they think by this they can get away because the crowd would be impressed by obscurity. Right? So you can change the world through clarity. The more clearly all of us can communicate as to what we want, the world will listen. And there's another word in Sanskrit for this, sankalpa, creation. If you have a sankalpa, if you have a clarity of vision, the world will come to your aid. Everybody, because everybody wants truth. So this is my takeaway.
That's what Maharishi said, right? What you pay attention to grows, and intentionality, sort of consciousness, is what creates. What was the one point I wanted to ask? Anyway, but let me. This is great. I think point was. So what we talk of vision, having a vision, is it like having a drishti, having a sankalpa is one of the same things? Where does that come from? From a quantum perspective?
Okay. Where does that come from? See, our mind is an instrument. It's in Sanskrit, it's called antahakaran, the inner instrument. The mind is mechanical. So whenever we are just using the mind, conscious, thought tied up to various things, we really cannot be creative. But inside ourselves is that spirit, is that consciousness. So we have to let the light from that inner lamp through and shine on the mind. And that's when, first of all, the vision comes from there. So the more we cover our minds through arrogance or through connection to the past, through attachment, through ego, the more we are separated from that light. So you have to let go. One of the most important things, in my view, for creativity and for changing the world is humility. To truly believe that we are all the same, because everybody, all of human beings, no matter where they come from, have the same potential. And if they don't display that potential, or if they don't achieve that potential, that's because that somehow their conditioning or their belief system has prevented them from being what in Sanskrit is called Shivoham. I am Shiva, I am consciousness, right? So everybody, if they believed in themselves, would then, you know, what the goddess does, if I may use another Indian idea, the goddess tells you, informs you when you're asleep or half asleep, and tells you this is what you have to do. This is like Ramanujan, you know, the Indian mathematician, the great mathematician who died at the age of 32. He would wake up and write these equations, which mathematicians are still in the process of wondering about, because they are totally dissociated from the mathematics of its times, and even mathematics that was to follow for another 50, 70, 80 years. So truly, if we are connected with ourselves, meaning to be connected with ourselves, we have to let our ego down, to truly be humble, truly, not just say it. Saying means nothing. Truly, truly, then wonderful things happen. Wonderful things happen. That's what's called serendipity. You know, Serendip was this guy, the sailor from Sri Lanka, who goes out and wonderful things happen. Another thing is that you know,
Hey, Dr. Kak, let me get some other voices in. Thank you. That's great. Let me go to the stay with the physics and the physics of it. So Dr. Anirban, what did you hear? What did you feel? Dr. Kak talked about vision and sort of the mind is mechanical. Is mind mechanical? I think you were saying mind is consciousness. Mind is fractal to the infinity. I mean,
no, I don't believe mind is mechanical, because there are many electromagnetic interactions, electrical interactions, magnetic interactions, many different forms of interactions are there which come together. But what we find when we try to understand mind is different kind of rhythm. So it may be just ionic, but it produces some time domain. For an example, for 200 years, scientists have been exploring the neuron firing. It's purely electrical. It is giving essential and good information about our thoughts, our working and others. But there are also electromagnetic interactions, magnetic interactions, so many kind of interactions you will find. For an example, our whole brain-body system, 76%, 77% is water. If you see every protein, there is if you see neurons, there are cluster of waters. Waters are arranging. And often I feel that when life was being created in this planet Earth, the water actually built the life form. Actually, if you think 77%, when I'm making a material, so I'm a material scientist, so I think it like that. If I have a big balloon, 77% water, and then something else are there, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, making your brain, then you would think that who is doped? For an example, the life form that we have, microbial life form, their genetic variation is 100 times more than we have. So we are a combined life with nature. So when we think of, you know, think of mind, we should try to find invariants. For an example, a kid looks at a cat and looks at a cat for once. But after that, whenever she looks at any other cats in the world, she can say, oh, that is a cat. It's called single shot learning in computer science. Or if she sees a camel, and then she would differentiate what are the other things with that camel. So I think invariance, different kind of invariance is the key to understand learning, mind and consciousness, how those invariants are there. So mechanical, I have objection. I have objection also in all these discussions to put blindly quantum into everything. Quantum does not integrate. It gives us the idea of disintegrating, isolated points, isolated pockets, and there is a blind dark region from one defined to other defined, and then there was a gap, and then renormalization, other concepts came up with other things. And regarding so when we apply quantum mechanics, we should be little bit respectful and little bit humble to the great scientific works that have been done. So we should not kind of, yeah, you know what I mean.
Okay, yeah, I understand. But I think I took literally that idea mechanical, because consciousness is also inside, I think he was mentioning. So let me ask you, do you believe consciousness is primary, or do you think from this microtubules consciousness can you produce, like you work with
No. I think,
and the Penrose?
Yeah. I don't agree with that microtubule is producing consciousness. I absolutely don't agree, because in our result we saw that there are, a triplet of triplet. You see on my back there is a temple-like architecture. So basically, when we were looking at the vibrations and frequencies, we found there is a symmetry. So I say 3 dimensions, spatial dimensions. Then 3 temporal dimensions, you all know, then 3 topological dimensions and 3 prime dimensions. I mean, the dimension of primes, which is fundamental to this universe. So somewhere consciousness, if it ever found, I feel that we have to get into the pattern of primes to integrate the topologies, and the topology will integrate the time scales and others. So basically, if that is so, then one single component cannot be responsible for consciousness. And regarding the world peace, I think everybody is born with something incredible, something unique to understand the pattern of this universe. And then that's why the completeness is never there. Completeness is in togetherness. So consciousness in other form could be the whole universe itself. So it's like I have some part of that pattern, that whole universe full of pattern, that is the conscious thing. And then that's why I am able to understand a part of it. I am able to, brain is a system to get the global pattern, some perspective of it inside me, so I can evaluate it. So is others, all conscious beings. So it should be a mathematical feature that partly get of the whole thing. So I never believe that consciousness is at a particular element, particular where each individuals are separate. I also don't believe. I think everything, every living thing, everything that is in the universe are interconnected, but in the mathematical domain that is out there. So I totally agree with you and all the panelists and others also that many scientists, I mean, Christoph Koch and others, they say a small part in the cortex region is responsible for consciousness. Some people are there in the hippocampus, above hippocampus, pons. Pons, you know, pons is just above the spinal cord. It's called Maheshwari. So when my father used to taught me, my father was a priest, when he used to taught me Vedic mantras, then he used to say there was a Bij mantra in every puja, you know, Hindus do puja, and in puja, everything is same. You know, God come take food, I give life to God, prana pratishtha. And then what we'd say is jala jala prajala prajala susumna mahashivapada vinyaga. So the spinal cord, rise it up, and then mahashivapada is a pons, where Mahashiva, Shiva, Bhagavan Shiva puts his leg, footsteps from the whole universe. Shiva is Mahakala. Kala and Kali, you know that time and wife of time. So they come together and put the Purusha and other things. So to me, I think that that pons is also, some people argue that that is responsible for consciousness. So many theories are there, many things are there. But I think Maharishi Vedic University and many others who are working here, and then also all the panelists have talked about integrating things, and everything is together. But understanding togetherness is the key. That is where the science lies, and we have to explore it, do serious and very serious work, that how this mixing up is there. You and me are together. We are same, but why and how? And when we understand it, the world peace will be established. I would not take your time.
Thank you, Anirban. And let me bring in Chris. Laszlo, you asked that question, that what do you call the hard problem, hard consciousness, and you should want your space for that. And I think you cited multiple, a couple of times at least, I've seen you talk, David Bohm, right? He said the two coexist. Could you ask that question maybe but you sort of presented it. Let's see here from, yeah.
You know, I want to come back though to this conversation about where consciousness resides or doesn't reside.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah.
You know, I think there are going to be so many arguments, as it were, about the specific mechanisms involved in the brain or in the process of consciousness, and interpretations about what people are saying. So, for example, I have had long conversations with Stuart Hameroff, personally, one-on-one, where he explained to me that his work with Roger Penrose on orchestrated objective reduction in microtubular lattices was not to say that consciousness actually originated in those tubular lattices, but rather that because they are you know, such finer parts of the axons and dendrites, they're able to process quantum level information. And as I understood it, what he's saying is that then if you are able to process information at the quantum level in your brain through these microtubular lattices, think about this for a mind-blowing idea. If you can process just one quantum piece of information, and if at the quantum level all information is entangled, then by being able to process one piece, you're actually able to in some way access information at the level of the universe itself. But again, I don't know enough of the neuroscience or the physics here to be able to only say my understanding from some of these conversations. But what we can say is, for Dr. Subhash, it's not only that we live in a participatory universe where the act of observation turns potentiality into actuality. So we have a role in shaping the world we experience. It's also that the quantum paradigm, I think we can all agree that the quantum paradigm has three fundamental features to it compared to the classical paradigm. It has wholeness to it, it has non-locality, and it has coherence. And when I say coherence, I'm talking about dynamic coherence. You know, so we can see in all aspects of life on Earth, at the meso level, micro level, and at the astronomical level, that there's sort of a fine-tuned dynamic equilibrium that can't be explained by chance. You know, I forget, there was some mathematical physicist who said that the likelihood of seeing the amount of order we see on Earth from chance would be like seeing a hurricane come through a scrapyard and assemble a Boeing 747 as it was blowing through the scrapyard. It's just improbable that we would see this level of finely tuned order. Without this idea that in fact the fundamental field of consciousness is not only whole and interconnected, it's whole making and it's interconnecting. And this is where I want to finish with, that my belief is that when we experience transcendental meditation or any other powerful spiritual experience, we are tapping into this essential reality of wholeness, connectedness, and coherence. And when we do that, it heals us. It makes us whole. So tapping into this unbounded ocean, as the TM people talk about it, when you tap into that, you're experiencing wholeness, you're experiencing connectedness, you're experiencing coherence, and that in turn makes you whole. And it's more important than ever now because we live in a life at the time in history that is so fragmented and fragmenting. You know, we're constantly the Generation Z apparently at any one time has six.
Thank you, Chris. Let me bring Kathryn also, if you don't mind. I get your point. Thank you. Dr. Pavlovich, you start with this beautiful idea that I'm in confusion. Has your confusion become greater, less, or what do you feel? Or how do you think?
My confusion is definitely greater. A week ago, I had it all together, and then over this last week, it's all become completely, but that's okay. There's lots to work on. I mean, I totally agree with Chris's comment that the cosmos, the universe, is already coherent. It's us that aren't. And it's our journey to heal, to find that level of healing for ourselves, I guess. Yeah. And what was
Okay.
your
No,
question?
no question. No, that's fine. I just wanted your input. So let me pose a question. So I became listening to 2 days. Even in the first day, I felt, and I just checked out yesterday, this idea of complementarity that you talked about, Dr. Kak. That's idea inner and outer, and you can do complementary in various ways, right? Opposites. But this idea of, we had some sustainability mindsets, and you, Dr. Nader, speak about the consciousness, all there is. First of all, Chris, totally agree with what you said about consciousness there, all this. I think that's a paradigm we're probably all agreeing with. So that the expansion on the outside, connection with nature kind of leads to inner possibilities of inner expansion, and then inner expansion leads to possibilities of our expansion. There's a one complementarity. It's like a dumb root chart. The more you grow on the outside, the more you grow inside. But I want to just sort of think of something else beyond that, which is we talked of this whole idea of uncontained rising. Since Chris was talking about how we do it, now we're getting to a little bit more behavioral levels, right, on the language level, etc. Do you? And so the two things I talked to Dr. Kak like a week, ago. So one thing was the idea of fractal, which I said Anirban was also wanting to talk, and then second we talk of uncontained risings. How do we unbound ourselves? Is there a way that our thinking can be shaped to become more whole making, let's say, right? Like the talk Dr. Nader gave us, creating inner wholeness. That's apparently the kind of phrase that's resonating with the Z-Gen that Chris was talking about. What do you think about that, Dr. Kak?
I think the answer is very simple. It's thy will, not my will. And as our people have said, it's about finding humility. It's about substituting the ego for echo and understanding that we are in an interconnected environment. And also one of the principles is that, whenever we feel irritation towards something, it's actually a mirror for us to, I am that person as well. We all have these different aspects, and we all, anything that's mirrored to us is something we need to learn from. So being able to listen very clearly to thy will instead of my will is the way I think that we will go forward. And that's what quantum empathy is about, finding that space of connection.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Kak.
I like the slogan, from ego to echo, right? That's what to resonate with things around us. That's what the echo is. One of the Upanishads has something very nice on this. It says, those who think they know do not know it. And those who are just doing it are the ones who are knowing it because they are in the flow. Ultimately, wholeness, we've talked about wholeness, that it's wholeness which is going to change the world. And that's where what Tony Nader said is perfectly true. If we are all whole from within, that wholeness will reflect through what we do, our connections and relationships with everybody else, and also because of this echo that takes place, that how does one form a vision? It's partly driven by expectations based on what we see others wanting us to do. So that's where that vision takes hold. And going back to Kathryn's point about you have a group of people and there are all kinds of ideas out there. There's a superposition, which is also one of the central notions of quantum mechanics. So from that superposition, how do you abstract that process that's going to change me and everybody else? And that's what we are looking for. And I think that's what Tony Nader mentioned. And that's what, in my view, should be one of the takeaways of this wonderful conference.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Anirban, any response to this idea of wholeness? Where does that, how does that resonate with your work? Creating inner wholeness. Is there an inner and outer in your way of thinking?
I think that when we will be able to understand that everything is together, when we will be able to discover that science and then the scientific principles, we will be there will nothing there nothing would be inside and outside. Everything will be one. And that is one samadristi or sannyasi means a sannyasi who sees everything by himself. But I liked your question. I wanted to say something about it. The question that you asked, that is there any way we can improve ourselves to see the whole, or see mix us with the whole or the entirety. I think that
Vision, yeah. Mhm.
in India, monks have tried for thousands of years how to do that. I mean, when I was in Ramakrishna Mission, I was brought up in Ramakrishna Mission, and we were forced trained for meditation, and we used to have fun and play and do nonsense things. But some of the things I remembered. Two things I would like to say in this word in a minute or so. First thing that I learned is Swami Vivekananda was talking to Ramakrishna, and then they were discussing what is samadhi, or samadhi is all about. Then he wrote somewhere in his book, and my father used to tell me also repeatedly, that one meditation is actually, you can keep your mind at a single point for 4 or 5 seconds. And if you want to achieve quality of one meditation, you need to practice years after years on a single point and keep it there, your mind, for 12 seconds. It's one meditation. And you have to work for 12 years. And that's why 12 years, and then continuously you increase that time domain, and 12 meditation at a time is samadhi. So 12 into 12, 144 seconds, or pal or muhurta, they call it. Leave it, the technical things aside. But yeah, Murmuha Samadhi means anybody can go to that 144 seconds and come back. And then in Ramakrishna Mission, when I hear that, then they said why I don't find it. I mean, except Vivekananda, nobody has said it. Then they said, tell me how many years Buddha meditated. He said 12 years. And then how many years many monks and gurus in India did it for 12 years. And Upagupta, the teacher of Buddha, the conversation with him and all these things then comes out. So answer to your question is that there are very well-defined routes and pathways, so that we can try to fill everything around us inside by complete transformation. For an example, Rishi Aurobindo's book, how whole body, cells, and everything get transformed. That's why Maharishi Vedic University will be an excellent platform to establish world peace. If everybody cannot understand, cannot feel everything is together. Togetherness is not a cup of tea we are born with. It's not everybody can do. I force, it's very unfortunate, I forced my daughter to fill with the universe and something like that, many ways, but it didn't work out that way. Maybe I'm not that knowledgeable, maybe I'm not experienced, but I feel that all human beings are not that level of consciousness that is there. Everybody has to try and improve in their way of doing it. So answer to your question is that we have to try following very well-defined protocols by thousands and thousands of years practitioners and their suggestions. And also, you know a lot. I mean, in your university, you do research a lot. So those things we need to learn. It's not just on the moment I think whole universe is with me and then I do it. No, it's not that magic.
Thank you. Let me go to Chris. Any comments on that? What you heard?
No, thank you.
Kathryn?
Same, excellent. I thought you summarized it beautifully.
Unmute yourself, Dr. Eaton, yeah.
Thank you. I raised my hand to give a hand for Anil.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Anil had the intention of an intentional conference to create universal human flourishing, and in 2 words, world peace. I think that this session 14 that was assembled has a great serendipity of being a milestone in the accomplishment of world peace. And we'll look back at this day in this panel and we'll say, we raised the research question of understanding how we are together, which Anirban said is the key that will bring world peace. And so to fulfill Chris's desire that research be generative, let's have the Sankalp today that we will continue to research this question and we will create universal world peace.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. I think it'll be a wonderful thing to carry this forward with all the positive energy that's been gathered by this great meeting. But of course, there's a lot of work involved, and therefore, Dr. Heaton and Dr. Maheshwari, that's going to be something that will have to be done.
Let me invite also Dr. Om Johnson to talk. He is the person who gave the keynote last time, and he's the lead, primary researcher in the world on collective consciousness. David, would you want to unmute yourself and say what you felt?
This has really been very inspiring to see all these brilliant minds.
Okay, maybe it's not getting yeah, go ahead.
All these brilliant minds from completely different kinds of traditions, but talking about things that we've been talking about for 50 years with Maharishi, and I just hope that people will connect with Maharishi's thought, and there's a lot of it is in his translation and commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, which is published by Penguin, talking about how meditation has been misunderstood in India as something that you have to concentrate on to connect with Dr. Anabar's point that actually it should be effortless and the mind is drawn in by bliss, because the infinite level of consciousness at the basis of our minds is a field of infinite bliss. And it's just very tricky and subtle technology to allow the mind to be in.
What did I do? David, could you just unmute yourself, please? I think you got muted by mistake. My mistake.
Yeah. So I just said that it's in Patanjali that to meditate, to transcend, to get from the active mind to the silent mind, is just a matter of silencing your mind. But it got misinterpreted in India that it takes great effort to silence the mind, but you can't do that. Any effort raises the activity, mental activity, and it's counterproductive. If anything, it might work that you bang your head on the wall and then you stop and you let go, and then the mind will transcend. But it's an effortless process, and it's just a matter of learning the. Maybe I'll even appear here. Here I am. This technology, and that's really the key to the whole thing that we've been talking about, how to change the world. And we all agree we have to change ourselves. Well, never mind about the cameras. Dropping it here. But there is a technology available for doing that, and it's very simple and natural and available worldwide. As I've said in my presentation, there's over 650 studies on it, and the reason for that is that Maharishi put it in a standardized framework, which has been available everywhere in the world, and so they had something standard to study, so that people are doing the same thing. But anyway, that's my comment. Thank you.
David, I want you to ask you one
really
thing.
Great.
I want to ask you, since we talked of vision, right? We talked of vision. Can you describe in a few words the totality of what you think Maharishi's vision was? Was it world peace? Was it what? I think you said it's always world peace only, is it?
No, it's absolutely world peace. He started out by going around the world, teaching people here and there transcendental meditation. Whoever came, he had no plan, he had no money, he just arrived. He had nature support. People would show up. They would say, "Oh, who are you? Are you from, you seem to be a yogi from the Himalayas or something." They would put him up. They would feed him. He would give lectures. A few people would start. And those were like seeds. The friends of the people would noticed that people were happier and more creative and so forth. And what are you doing? And so I learned this thing. And he would come back next time, and whoever was most enthusiastic about it, he would make them the leader of the movement. And eventually, after going around the world several times, the whole thing built up. It was global from the very beginning. And so that's the plan, and it's continuing to happen. And the whole idea of collective consciousness, and that even a few of us transcending affect the many, because order is more powerful than in order, non-order. That the power of coherent elements in the system are proportional to the number squared, whereas the incoherent elements is only proportional to their number, and all of those arguments. But you guys who are so brilliant could greatly help expanding this. I just wish that you would learn TM and experience it for yourself. And the key to creating world peace is to become peaceful yourself. This peaceful mind, peaceful body, peaceful world. We went with Maharishi to see the Shankaracharya in Jyotirmad in 1975. And he said to us, if you want to change the world, you have to change yourself. That was his message for us. And that's the message for all of us. And that's the message that you've all been saying that's been coming out in this conference. So it's really been amazing and fantastic. And thank you, Anil, for putting this on and gathering all these brilliant people. And I feel so honored to hear you and now to be talking to you. I'm not any great intellectual, but here I am talking to these most brilliant minds in the world. And this is wonderful.
Come on, David.
So,
but that's humility of the highest order. That's who he is. That's amazing. Just talk what you mentioned. That's how David is always like. So he's been like a mentor to me. Dr. Kak has been a mentor to me and many others. And so I really thank everybody. And I think one of the things if I may mention, when I signed in, right? Kathryn was the first one to say, how are you feeling? I said, totally blissful. Yesterday, somebody said, you must be tired. Like, you've a whole week, you should take a rest. And I said, no, I just meditate. I go to dome. I just actually find time to go to the dome. So, I think when the vision is there in some ways, right, it shows, and you don't feel stressed at all. My energy at this evening is at the end of the conference is probably higher than before, because I'm so energized by, learning from these great minds and having this is the collection of, we've distilled everything we learned so far, and for looking ahead, all these architectures of various, who knows? I just wrote down while David was talking this, you said, who was Mr. Serendip? I didn't know Mr. Serendip existed like that. I didn't know Mr. Ganit existed. That is so interesting. That I think serendipity and spontaneity will create that. That's probably another principle of flourishing in the future, right? Being open. One of the things we discuss among our people that, how do we create certain openness to evidence of this collective consciousness, right? People can see it and that's they're not open. So I think then being open to uncertainty, not uncertainty in the bag is bad word, but openness to, flourishing, openness to positive or whatever happens. Anyway, I'm so delighted. Anybody else? Dr. Kak and Kathryn, Anirban, I'm such a fan of Anirban, and he's so young, and then he's just unbelievable.
Briefly, I'll be extremely brief because it's a very vast subject. Clearly, in the Vedas itself, there is a division in language of apara and para, knowledge, which is lower, and higher is para. But to connect with a point that has already come up, and the point was that we talk in terms of earth, water, air, and fire, right? And that's what our whole approach to the world has been, particles, which is earth, air, water, and fire. But there's also been this thirst in the West for this quintessence, the missing fifth, which is Akasha, the missing fifth, which was taken to be this carrier or medium through which consciousness speaks to all of us, right? So that is another way. This is just situating it another way. But to come back to your point, Mohan, yes, when you have that connection with the higher, with the para, then words lose all their meaning, because para is beyond words. It cannot be caught in language. And that's why, you know, the Vedas are the science of the experiencing self. So you cannot express that knowledge in terms of equations or in terms of any formulations. That can only be intuited. So totally agree with you, Mohan.
Yeah, thank you. And on transcendence, I wanted to bring China in. There's a Chinese saying called the only way safety from fire is on the other side of the other bank of the river. And I feel the bank of is the waking state of consciousness, the third state, right? There's fires going on here, there, confusion, commotion. And when you go to the other side, the fourth state, when you cross over from the other side, then it's just sort of you're safe in the sense of the deepest sense. It's all open and all that stuff. So I think what you just said sort of makes sense. Just transcend and be there and just enjoy the fullness of life. And I think if we are blissful, then the whole world is blissful. But yatha, what is it? Yatha pinde, yatha brahmand. How we are is the
Yat pinde tad brahmande.
Yat pinde tad brahmande.
In the cosmos. Yeah.
Anil, let me say
And
thank you.
Maharishi,
Yeah, let Dennis wants to share something.
Just to say thank you on behalf of all the attendees who don't have their microphone on, but I'm sure they all want to say thanks to everyone involved in putting on the conference, all the moderators, all the panelists, and all the volunteers. And I see Vikram Gulati is with us tonight, and he did an awful lot of work putting together the program as well. We can all feel pretty fulfilled that this was a successful 3-day event and that the dialogue certainly will continue.
I can say one more thing about that. Both Dennis and David, and then another person who was panelist in the morning, she has known Maharishi since she was 5. Like, both said this is kind of the thing since SCI conferences, right? The kind of gathering that has happened of this kind of intellectual, right? Agree with that?
yes, the university began because Maharishi was very interested in talking to the top people in the world, and I was interested that Dr. Subhash Kak was mentioned, Dr. Sudarshan, very good friend, and spent a lot of time with Maharishi, and Maharishi absolutely loved him. And these conferences, he had people like Buckminster Fuller and various Nobel Prize winners. Brian Josephson is a TM meditator, and he was there a lot when we were in Europe. And Dr. Prigogine, and so this is just like a continuation of that. Maharishi's idea was that he knew the whole story from Vedanta, from his teacher, and also, I have to say, from his level of consciousness. He really was the living embodiment of the highest level of enlightenment that the Vedas talk about, unity consciousness. When you talk to Maharishi, there was an individual sitting there, but you knew that you were talking to the mind of the entire universe. And I always found that very daunting, but he very quickly put everybody at their ease. You know, one time I was like trying to see him, looking, and
Thank you, David. Thank you.
No, I'm just an ordinary person.
I want to hear 2 of our speakers because they need to go in other geographies. Anirban,
okay.
You want to say something quickly? How you feel about the world?
Yeah. So the last word that I would like to say is just to add a brief comment to Mohan's question, is that yes, in Vedas, every single word you put letter has a meaning in Sanskrit. So letter has a meaning, but you put them together by transformation in such a way that it gets a rhythm. A word gets a rhythm. A sentence, all the words you put together, assemble, it gets a rhythm. A paragraph has a undefined rhythm, defined rhythm. A chapter has a rhythm, and the whole book should be a part of the rhythm. So United Nations University carried out a beautiful work on how, and they put the waveforms, and I also did the same in my laboratory, the oscilloscope, to see the rhythms that is there. So when you pronunciate or sing Vedas in 23 different notes in classical music, there is something which is beyond the meaning, just the meaning of that. So you feel it with mechanical vibrations now all over your body and everywhere when you enchant it. So there is something just beyond it. That's why for thousands of years, they didn't allow writing it. So they wanted it to hear and go.
The sound, Shruti value.
Yes.
Thank you. And Dr. Pavlovich, Kathryn, any final words of wisdom?
just it's been a wonderful experience. Really enjoyed listening to people and having different worldviews. And thank you for your organization, and I hope we will do it again. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.